This conference will now be recorded.
Okay. So yeah, that's enough of the housekeeping stuff. You guys didn't come here to hear me talk. You came here for Blazor. So if you're watching this, hello and welcome to the STL Full Stack. This is the Microsoft Blazor presentation by Clint Edmonson and Jesse Spinks. And I will turn things over to you, Clint, and make you the presenter. If I can do that.
Can you also add Jesse as a second presenter while you're at it, just to make it a little quick?
Yeah, let me see. Can I do that? Have two presenters? I'm still learning GoToMeeting, so I've only ever made one person a presenter, but I'll give it a shot here.
I think you can, but we'll figure it out if not. Yeah.
Let's see.
All right, cool. Well, welcome everyone. Yeah. See if I can figure out how to minimize this stuff. Oh, Jesse is now presenter. All right, it looks like it's one at a time.
Oh, okay. Let me go ahead and get you back on there. And I must say that was the right Jesse.
Yep.
Okay. There you go, Clint.
All right. Let's see if we can figure this out. All right, cool. Well, thank you. Welcome, everyone. Real quick, before we get into it, I do want to introduce the obligatory sales rep. So we've got our senior account rep, Connor Ryan. Wanted to give you guys a little bit of information about Polaris. So Connor, take it away.
Thanks, Clint, and thanks everyone for joining. Really excited to be chatting with you today. Wanted to do a quick introduction to Polaris Solutions. We are a software services firm based out of St. Louis and Chicago. We focus on .NET development and architecture, along with application modernization in the cloud and on-prem, agile coaching, and DevOps, both tooling and application architecture. With that, I'll throw it back over to you, Clint. Really appreciate everyone's time tonight.
You bet. All right, so real quick, the raffle. Connor's paying for this out of his pocket, so enter as many times as you want.
Yeah.
Let me see if I can paste this in the chat window. Whoops, let me go back. I may have to skip out of here. Throw this in there. I'll put it up at the end as well. Just
if you want.
Cool.
Yeah, so grab that when you get a chance. There's a lot of controls on this bad boy. Okay, all right, next up, I want to do a quick poll if you guys have the time. I'll paste this link in the chat window as well. Let's talk about what everybody's currently doing as far as their UI stack. If I can figure out how to get to it, there it is. Always good when it's interactive, right? All right, yeah, let's give that a shot and let's see what we get. So you should see something like this when you get to it. And I think you can only pick one, so pick the one you most recently used if you use multiple platforms. And we are currently using Angular on an engagement, Jesse and I, so I will vote for that. And let's see what we get. Another minute. React takes a quick lead. Cool. All right. Well, this is good. Good to see. So it looks like we've got HTML around 28%, Angular 22, React at 30, Vue.js at 10. Oops, somebody's using Blazor. How about that? And other. Cool. Awesome. Well, thank you guys. It's always good to kind of see the lay of the land and what's going on out there. Jesse and I are using Angular on a pretty large project, and to be honest with you, every day we wish we had Blazor, and we'll get into some of the reasons why. But we have had a lot of fun over the last about 8 months building this gigantic app. Let's see. So, real quick, the value proposition for Blazor, right off the bat. This is coming straight off of Microsoft's website. So, build client apps with C#. Yes. Interactive web UIs, yes. Runs in WebAssembly or on the server. That's kind of interesting. We'll talk a little more about what that means. Built on open standards. What does that really mean? That's HTML, CSS, the web standards that we're all used to and we've been building applications on for years. A big promise here, we can share .NET code and libraries. So if you guys are familiar with .NET and using standard and portable class libraries, this is supposed to be the web UI technology to allow us to integrate directly with those. We can't have JavaScript interop, which sounds good because there is always that one library in JavaScript that we need that we just can't do in any other platform. Hey, the tooling's free. That used to be a big deal. I think these days it's pretty common for development tools and platforms to be open source or given away so that we can build on it without any friction. There is a pretty good component ecosystem going. I'll talk a little bit more about with third parties. And fully supported on Windows, Mac, and Linux. That's kind of interesting. That's new. So I've mentioned this talk in the title of this talk, how does this compare to Silverlight? And we'll touch on it throughout the talk. But if you guys have ever used Silverlight or remember Silverlight, that was the promise, right? Fully supported. It works on Mac, Windows, and Linux if you got the plugin. So we'll talk quite a bit about how this differs from that and maybe how we got burned by Silverlight and why this might be a little bit different. So our reaction when we saw it, I got to use this. It's got to be animated. There we go. So when I saw it, I said, finally, we can get rid of JavaScript. I know TypeScript is out there. TypeScript's pretty cool. TypeScript to me made JavaScript bearable, but give me some C#. I love that. I love the language. I love the runtime. I love the framework. I would love to be able to build rich front ends with it. And I did back in the day with Silverlight, with XAML, WPF. It would be so nice to have that kind of flexibility and power in the browser. So we're going to be using C# and open standards, HTML and CSS. And I don't know if Jesse got it wired up as his demo, but if we have time, I can show you. I've got a compilation step that integrates SCSS into mine and SAS into mine so that we can do some more powerful formatting and transformation stuff. A reusable web component framework, that's pretty much a must-have these days with any new framework that comes out because you don't want to start from scratch and write all those things yourself. You want to have a library to draw upon. If any of you have ever used PrimeNG or Raiden or some of the other frameworks out there that are free or bought a Telerik or DevExpress or Sync Fusion Control, you know you get a huge leg up starting with a library of pre-built components. Another big one that's always been great for richer clients is the client and server can share some or all their code and libraries, right? If we've got a set of domain objects or entities that we want to maintain and we got some contracts that we want to be able to share across multiple layers of our application, we get that if it's all in C#. And finally, the one that I really, really was looking forward to is assembly language speed. We still run into this day building large JavaScript-based and Angular apps, we start hitting the limits of what the browser can hold. And frequently we have to modify our configurations to keep inching up the stack size and the payload size that we can handle. But it sure would be nice if this stuff was compact, compressed, potentially obfuscated, and give us the ability to really get some close to the metal speeds. So that's kind of the value proposition. A little bit more about WebAssembly. So this is straight off their webpage. Just wanted to kind of bring this up too. So this is now officially in a 1.0 format, has been shipped on all the major browsers at this point. It is a binary format, it's basically a stack-based virtual machine that runs inside of your browser within the context of the JavaScript VM. Designed to be portable, run on any programming language that anyone wants to support and port it over to it. And there have been a large number of languages that have been adapted with a cross compiler to compile to it. Because it's assembly level, it's going to be faster and more efficient than a typical bytecode interpreted runtime. It's safe. It still follows the same sandboxing that we're used to with JavaScript. So it's got all the protections around memory management as well as access to the physical hardware. You can still access your cameras, your other audio devices, any external things using the safer ways that the browsers allow us to connect to those and adapt to them. So very compatible with what we're used to in the JavaScript world. It's open and debuggable. It is ultimately a textual format. I don't know how many of you enjoy reading assembly language for fun and profit. I'm not one of them. I could take that or leave it, but I trust that the people that love to read and write compilers for breakfast take care of that for me. And it is part of the open web. It is part of the W3C. So cross our fingers, this is going to be around for a long time. And we'll talk a little bit more about our thoughts on that later. So that's kind of what this is built on top of and the promise of what Blazor is going to be. So with that, I think I'm going to turn it over to Jesse. You want to request control, Jesse?
Sure, if I can find the button. Um, if you can give me control faster than I can request it, I'd highly recommend it because I can't even find it. There it is. Cool. Can you guys see my screen?
Not yet. There it goes.
Sweet.
Yeah.
Cool. So with Blazor, there's two main hosting models, and if you've done any research into Blazor, you've probably seen these two before. But just to kind of go over them again pretty quick, you have server-side Blazor app. So that means you're going to be serving the app from an ASP.NET Core actual app that's running on a server, and all your UI updates are going to be handled through a SignalR connection. So these two pictures that I've got here down at the bottom, these are like the typical go-to just UI demonstrations of server versus client side. So for the client side, this is going to be utilizing, this is a Blazor WebAssembly app. Your runtime, the .NET runtime, your dependencies, and the app are all going to be downloaded to the client's browser. So all that work is going to be offloaded to the client. It's not going to do anything on a server. It's going to use JS interop for DOM manipulation and API calls. And the cool thing about this is, since there is no server required, you could do something like you could just serve this app directly off a CDN. You don't have to have anything, serve this to your client necessarily, or a server to serve it. So that's just kind of a quick rundown of server versus client side. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and...
Hey, real quick, Jesse, before you leave the slide, one thing that we left off of the server side is because it runs server side, it does maintain a small amount of session state memory for every person that's connected. So it's not a full VM or anything like that, but it does maintain enough state per connection through SignalR to be able to render and re-render the DOM and serve back events. So something to keep in mind. There is a finite number of clients that could be served up, and I believe it's in the thousands. So it's not tiny, but it does maintain a few K of memory, basically whatever it takes to load that page and track the conditions that happen on it.
And Microsoft has some documentation for like more advanced cases of how to handle serving to a lot of different clients. So yeah, there is some more information on that. So let me go ahead and start my app up and we'll get into a demo here real quick. So I chose to go with the just a Blazor WebAssembly app. So this is not a Blazor server. So I heard people like white space, so I made sure to include a lot of it. But here's a simple app. I basically just made a CRUD contact app. So I'm using Blazor for my front end. I'm using Azure functions for my back end, air quotes. And those are just going to be talking to a SQL database. So here I have just a simple contact list that I can add people to. So I can add myself. So that's going to call my Azure function to go ahead and add somebody. I have little details here, so we'll look at Vladdy here. Just some state stuff. So we've got some disabled fields. If I click edit, we're going to go ahead and enable those. I can make some changes, so we can change him to Tom. Do update. I also have some validation on here that's happening. So if I clear this out and I try to submit, we get the first name field is required. If I made his name just a little too big, I'm going to get some validation on that as well. So all this validation is happening in the client, where I think back in like with MVC, you're going to send that back to your back end. It's going to do the validation and then send back new HTML that says, hey, your name's too long. So this can all happen before I make any calls. And it's all done in C# instead of doing like some JavaScript front end validation. So that's pretty cool. So I can cancel that and go ahead and delete him. That's the gist of this app. It's pretty straightforward and simple, but let's go ahead and look at the code. So I'm going to go ahead and stop running that. So kind of want to go through this in order. So with the Blazor WebAssembly app, your structure is going to look pretty similar to mine. I have a couple extra files in the test project down here. But for the most part, this is what you're going to see if you spun up a new Blazor WebAssembly project right now. So your program class, it's going to do a couple things. It's going to define your builder, which is a WebAssembly host builder. It's going to go ahead and add our root component, which is the app razor file. and then it's going to go ahead and add a scope service for our HTTP client. So that's how we're going to be making calls, or how I at least was making calls to my Azure functions. And then it's just going to call build.
That's
So if we look at that,
that's the dependency injection library, right?
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's used for dependency injection. So looking at our app Razor file, two things to call out. It uses this router component. So that's really what defines when you have a Razor component with a page directive at the top, and you define, like contact details or something like that. That's what's going to get sent here and uses this route data, and it's going to go to this route view component, which then it's going to render your page.
Hey, Jesse, can you pump your font up?
Yes, I can.
A little small.
How's that?
There you go.
Cool. Something else to note, as part of this route view, you have this default layout property that you can set. So out of the box, it's just set to this main layout. So we'll take a look at that next. But that's basically, if you wanted to set custom layouts per page or for just a couple pages, you can specify that directly in your component. But I didn't do that in any of mine. So by default, it's just going to be this main layout. Something else to point out, we have this imports.razor file. So this is just importing a lot of stuff that's used by the Blazor WebAssembly app out of the box. And the cool thing about this is the compiler is going to pick up this file, and it's going to distribute these to all the Razor templates, and then it's going to recursively do that in all the subfolders. So since this is in my my main project root, it's going to go to everything. So instead of doing usings in each file, repeating every time I make a new Razor component, you can just do it once here, and it'll go everywhere. So jumping back over to that main layout, this is the one we were talking about a minute ago in the app Razor. So it just does two things. It just has a div for our nav menu, which was that sidebar that comes with every Blazor app. I just decided to leave it in there. And then you have this div here, which is going to render the body. So that's where your markup for your Razor files is actually going to be displayed. So with all that being said, let's jump into the contact list.razor file. So this was that home page that we saw that had all the little cards for my contacts. So you can see it's, if you've ever worked with Razor pages before, you've got C#, in your markup. And you can also have C# down in a little code block. You can also have it in the code behind, which is what I did with this specific file, just to kind of show both ways that you can do it. And as I kind of mentioned before, we have that page directive that's just going to go ahead and define this as our home page. So I just have a slash there. Something I also wanted to call out was we do this like is loading to decide what we're going to render. So if you might have caught it there at the beginning when I started the app, there's a little loading header that displays if there's no contacts. And that's because of this is loading Boolean, which I defined on the back end. So we do that in Angular, like if you have some stuff that you need to load, like if I tried to load this contact card, but I didn't have any contacts, I'm going to get an exception. So that's just a way to kind of handle that. So if we look at the code behind, it's going to look something like this. It's just a partial class where I defined a couple methods. This onInitialized async is a lifecycle event for Blazor. So this is going to be this is the first thing that happens when it comes onto the page. Actually, strike that. There is one lifecycle event that happens before that. We'll get into that in a minute. But this is basically going to ensure that I can load my contacts before anything else happens, and then I'll go ahead and set that is loading to false. That way, it'll go ahead and render my contacts. On top of that, I just have a little add contact method here. This is using that HTTP client that was injected to the component to go ahead and call my Azure function. So just some general stuff there. Nothing too excited. That looks like some plain old C#. So the next one we could look at is the contact card, which is actually this guy. So this was a reusable component. I just wanted to try it out and see how it kind of worked. I didn't go too deep with it, but it's pretty cool. I mean, you just spin up a new Razor file, you give it some HTML, some markup. This one I decided to do the code block down here instead of doing the code behind, just to try that out. And I actually have a parameter that comes into this one. And you can do that by putting this parameter annotation on a property. So what that looks like over here is, actually, no, that's coming from no, that's it. Yeah, I passed the contact. That's right. So I'm just passing the whole contact in. And since that's listed as a parameter, I can just go ahead and do like first name, last name. And then here, for instance, I have an onClick event that does a navigation call, and it's just going to go ahead and go to my contact details page and pass that contact ID. So that's a little bit of routing that we'll get into here in a moment. But I think actually that was it. That's all I want to talk about for that one. Yeah. So going on to the contact details, this one is going to be a page, not a component. So I use that page directive. And then up here, I'm also specifying that I'm expecting a contact ID that is an int. So similar to the last page, I'm going to define that as a parameter. But in my onInitialize, I'm going to go ahead and set that contact ID to contact ID. And that's going to go ahead and get that from that route. So once I have that, I can then load my contact. I just wanted to do it. It's kind of a funky way to do it, but I wanted to have an excuse to use my Azure function to go ahead and load a single contact. So you'll see once it sets that, it does another get, and it's looking at my get contact endpoint there. So another cool thing about this page was this is the one that had validation. So if you want to do form validation, you use some pre-built Blazor components that are just kind of given you as part of the framework. The main one being this edit form. So that's going to be your wrapper for the stuff you want to validate. And you're going to specify two things at least. You're going to specify your model, which for me is contact. So that looks like this guy here. It's just a plain class. We have a first name, last name, and a contact ID. And then you're going to specify your onValidSubmit method. So once validation is clear, and you're good to go, this is what it's going to call. So it's going to call my update contact method, which we've seen enough of my Azure function calls. It's going to call an update Azure function. So you're also going to have to include a data annotations validator component and a validation summary. And those are required if you want to display those messages up top. Otherwise, it'd probably just sit there and you wouldn't really see anything. It just wouldn't hit this onValidSubmit. Another thing to call out with that, when you're doing validation within the form, you have to use these input text components as opposed to just using a standard input element with like a type of text. These are specific to these edit forms, and I'm pretty sure you have to use these for the validation to work properly. And another little caveat to that is they don't just use the standard @bind, which I've been using in some previous components. So just here, just @contact or like bind new contact first name. You're specifically doing bind value. Otherwise, again, your validation is just not going to work. So with that, if you look at the contact, basically how you do that validation is you can just use data annotations. So for these, I just use two simple ones, required for both and string length 16. And then you can specify your error message as part of this data annotation. So if you notice it, when I did the too long of a name, we got the first name can only be 16 characters long. So that all can happen on the front end, and I don't have to do any sort of post back to re-render the HTML or anything. It just happens on the front end. Blazor. So that's pretty much the app in a nutshell. There's just some standard like on-click events. There's different events you can bind to with Blazor. On-click is the most popular one that I used. So I just did little things for that, like that edit button would do toggle editing. There was a funky one here. So this on-click was interesting because it wasn't just a void or a task that I wasn't passing anything into, which is pretty much every other method I was doing. This one specifically, I wanted to add a contact ID. So you can't just do like navigation details, contact ID. It complains about that. So this was kind of a funky syntax you had to use until it's going to be calling a function. So I don't know if that's something they'll improve on or make a little easier to find out. But yeah, that was kind of a funny scenario to run into. So if you want to pass parameters, you can. Just a little bit of different syntax. And then, yeah, that was pretty much most of the app. Something else I wanted to touch on was just this Blazor contact test. I was curious if Blazor supported unit testing, and I was pretty happy to find out that it does. Because if you're building, a production application, it's pretty important to have unit tests to make sure you're not just constantly breaking stuff with your changes. So I did a very simple test here, but basically I just wanted to make sure that this contact card, this little H5 tag that's rendering contact first name and last name, that it's rendering properly. So basically my expectation is when I render this component with a contact with a specific first name and last name, that's what's going to be in this H5 element. So if we look at that test, I'm doing a few things here. So The testing framework you're actually going to use with this is called BUnit. It's open source and it's built kind of on top of XUnit, but it's got some specific functionality for Blazor, which is pretty cool. So like this render component method, you just pass it whatever class for your component that you want to render. And then if you have parameters like I did, I had the contact parameter. So I just built out a little test contact here with first name test, last name contact, and we pass that in. And then once you do that, you can then start looking for specific, I think you can search by class names, you can search by ID, element ID, or you can search by the element itself. I was lazy, and since I only had one H5 element, that's what I searched. And then you can just do a simple assertion on the value of that. So I did like test contact equals name text content. So you can kind of already see it pass, but we'll just run it again just for funsies. I think I just debugged it. Oh, it's still gonna run. So it should just stop debugging here in a second. And we're good. So that was just a little test I wanted to try out just to see if unit testing was even possible with it. And again, I was pretty happy to find out that it was. And then Clint, I know you said you had kind of a demo for the Sass. Yours is probably a little more in depth than mine. I just added a Sass file, didn't actually do any Sass markup, just did some simple CSS, and that's why the names on mine were red. But it does, I mean, it supports Sass in that sense. So,
Yeah, it's
yeah,
super
if you got
easy.
a more, if you got a more detailed one and you want to show, feel free. But
No, I mean,
about all
I
I
don't
got.
want to spin it up just to show that, but you just include the web compiler extension, and it starts compiling your Sass files. And then it's a matter of going to, if you go into www.root, that's where the actual host page is, if you crack that open. So, and go to index.html. So turn on a Sass web compiler and just replace line 10, or have your Sass compiler generate that file rather than the built-in file. You're good to go. So it's pretty straight. It took about 5 seconds to set up Sass, and then from there on, you can add, for each of your Razor pages, you can add a code behind file and a Sass file per page or per component, so that the styling is restricted just down to each individual element. So I don't know if you guys have worked with Angular. This is almost direct parallel with the way we've done things in our large Angular apps, almost to a T. It's just, in my mind, way simpler syntax. So, yeah, I mean, with that, questions, guys? What do you guys think? Anything that we flew past too quickly?
How large of apps have you built with it?
Say that again?
How large of applications have you built with it so far?
So we're still in the playing around stages. We've done a couple internal things, 5 or 10 pages, nothing huge yet. So
Okay, I did a couple of huge ones so far.
Yeah.
I think I know a little bit more than you guys, so I had some questions, but I'm not sure if you're going to be able to answer them. Most of it is about controlling the render tree and about deciding when to render things. Generally, it's when you have a lot of subcomponents to your parent component, where you're trying to get them all to talk to each other. A lot of times it'll try to re-render everything over and over again until they're all done. Now there's a should render and some things like that, and I haven't really got into figuring them out yet. But I did all this in the matter of like, man, I must have worked in about the last 2.5 months. And I've actually seen it kind of grow, and the libraries all grow with my projects. So it's at the beginning stage, so it's changing really fast. Some of the things you mentioned I didn't even know about yet, because Sass just happened. It must have, because they didn't have that originally. So.
Well, hit us up afterwards. Yeah, I don't want to bore everybody else to tears, but we could certainly do a little hacking. So we'll give you our contact info at the end. So we're trying to learn as fast as we can too. There's lazy loading support coming now, which was my biggest concern. The first release did not have that. So you generate a 200-page app, you're going to be downloading.
Yeah, it was a couple hundred megs. Is my first one. It was huge.
That's a long loading screen, brother.
Well, they talked about doing, they call it, what's the term? Tree shaking for the libraries. So for pieces you're not using, it won't download. It's basically, all the best parts of JavaScript doing the same thing. But it's not there yet. And a lot of things are waiting on 5, so.
Yeah, well, I suspect some of that is for the server-side model, not for the WASM client-side model. But we'd have to dig into that because it makes a lot more sense to be trimming stuff you don't even want to send over the wire. Whereas if you got the DLL on your machine, that's kind of a different runtime. Yeah, let's catch up afterwards and kind of deep dive. But yeah, this is still, I mean, 1.0 of the server model released right at the beginning of the year. 1.0 of which I don't even know why they call it the same technology, but we'll get into that. 1.0 of the WASM client-side model went live in May, so it's still really fresh. Yeah, we're all still learning. But yeah, to answer a question that might have not been directly stated, we don't have any clients using it yet. We got a lot of clients asking us, what similar to you, how big of an app did you build? How'd that work out? So I think we're going to be learning a lot in the next year, but I'm super excited about it. Anything else?
I want to ask you, how's the speed of the initial loading? Because I know you probably has to download, the client's browser has to download the .NET or.
Yeah. So they
how's the
set a
initial
target.
loading?
Yeah. So of course it depends on how much you put in your app. That's why the lazy loading is important. But the actual runtime for Blazor itself, they've got down around 1 megabyte. So they've worked and they've, I mean, gone to 1/3 of the size it was when they first released it. So maybe Jesse, you want to run it in runtime mode and let's see the DLLs. You can actually see the compiled DLL in your browser window. So if you run a release build, you'll actually see the DLLs get downloaded. It's pretty cool.
You can also hit F12 and it'll tell you in the actual. Yeah.
So if you look at network, you'll see, and there they are, sizes 2K, 5, 4K. I mean, they're tiny. I mean, and those are the .NET libraries that come along with the ones we've included. Blazor contacts, there's about the 5th one down is 10K. So it really is going to depend on the size of your app. The bulk of the download will be your app, not the runtime. And it's going to be a matter of how can you chunk that up and do the dynamic lazy loading to control that. So I'm hopeful. I can't be any worse than Angular. I'll tell you that much. We've got an Angular app. What do we have? 250, 300 screens. And I mean, it's pretty snappy. We broke it up into 8 or 9 different regions and dynamically load it. So it's not an issue. And I hope this won't either. But again, time will tell. We're still early parts of putting this out into the world.
Two
Thank
huge
you.
React apps. So.
Yeah. Oh, actually, I want to talk about that. From what I see in the backend in the code, it looks very similar to React. You know,
Yeah.
some of the stuff look very similar to JSX. Yeah, pretty sure Brian agree on that.
I mean, these guys, they're late to market. They pretty much stole the best ideas from the other frameworks, right? Which is smart. It's smart because it's easier to adopt it if you're familiar with the paradigms.
Yeah.
What I like about it is the terseness of the components. I mean, you just define a property, tell it you want it to be a parameterized. It's just boom. You can have new components in seconds up and running. It's pretty slick. And compared to Angular, I mean, it's a couple minutes to get a component written, make sure the template's wired up to it, get it in place, and see it. So there's a pretty big improvement in productivity. Cool. What else, guys?
And so I'm still pretty new to React, but I lean heavily on Create React app for my scaffolding. I don't think I've actually created a React app from scratch. And maybe you guys covered it, I just missed it, but do you get something like that? Do you get the scaffolding for a Blazor project kind of provided to you, or do you have to?
Yeah. Let me share and I'll show you a similar app to Jesse. So what Jesse showed you was basically the file new project with a single page. If I can share, I'm gonna get back in there.
I kind of figured you do with Microsoft, but
yeah, I mean, you make me a presenter.
Oh yeah, let's do this. Where are you? All right, should be rocking and rolling.
All right, yeah. So out of the box, you get something kind of like this. You get this kind of LO Blazor. It includes these first 2 things that are pre-built, which is a little interactive page to do a button click.
Sure.
And a sample to go fetch some JSON data from an API.
Okay.
And then what I've added to this one, I added a little collab. I wanted to get Sass working and play out with some styling just to make sure this is still HTML and CSS for better or for worse, guys. And just dumb stuff like this is a pain. This took me longer to get the collapse working than to get the pages working. But I've got calling the DevUp conference. I added a quick API call to that. This is spinning that server. Probably went to sleep. So there's all the sessions coming back. And then I did one for the speakers. So pretty snappy, same thing. This is a little component that renders a speaker picture, their name, company, and a button. So,
Nice.
yeah, so you get, I mean, I'd say it's better than a typical MVC architecture project. You get, some pages set up, you get your layout, I mean, it's pretty clean.
Yeah, no, when we get just a little atom diagram with create React app, that's pretty much it, I think.
So,
can you debug that? Not from the IDE, but from the web?
Yes.
Well, you debug it in the IDE through the web app. Is that what you're asking?
Okay, so you can't debug like you can with JavaScript, like if you've got a production error or something like that. You can't go.
No, you can do that.
Well, you can attach to.
I can give you the YouTube video on how to do it. It's not that hard.
So the short answer is not JavaScript because this is WebAssembly. It's compiled, but there are tooling to let you attach to one that's running.
Okay.
Yeah. But yeah, I'm a little scared that you're debugging production apps in production, but sometimes you got to do what you got.
Like production, but it's like you can't debug from the IDE when you got a server problem.
Yep. Sometimes. But yeah, I mean, it's. I think I'm running debug mode right now. I mean, I may have to stop it. But no, it's got the typical developer experience where you do it all locally, and then when you're ready, you compile it and ship it. But yeah, there are tools to attach. So if I go in here and I want to look at the speakers, I didn't set a breakpoint. Let's see, get sessions. Here we go. Why is it not debugging? I may not have it set up to debug right. Oh, I'm in release. That's why. So here's something interesting we found in debug. What was it, Jesse? In debug, I can debug with breakpoints, but there's something we can only do in release. What was it? Do you remember, Jesse?
I don't remember now. I don't think it was debug related though.
No.
Was it the app setting stuff? I mean,
what was it?
that was both, but.
So yeah, if I click on sessions, of course, I get my breakpoint. So it's basically, oh, I know what it was. It's attaching to the debugger, but check this out. Let me go ahead and continue this. But what's interesting is if we look at F12, when I'm in debug, it actually downloads a JavaScript version of the compiled app, which is about 6 megs. So when you're debugging, it's actually attaching and doing a JavaScript debug of the WebAssembly, if that makes sense. So it does not actually download DLLs. It doesn't compile and download the DLLs, from what I can tell. I might be wrong. But from what I can tell, it doesn't bring down the binaries. It brings down a big honking file with all your WebAssembly inside of a JS file, which is not what I was expecting. So I'm debugging using Visual Studio. It's all great. When I go to release it, let me stop, switch to release, and run it again. Of course, I can't debug now, but I actually see the DLLs. So it was kind of weird. Like I was expecting DLLs to be there all the time, but I think because of the way they have to attach to the browser debugger, it has to be JavaScript. But again, still learning the ropes on this. So if I do F12 on this and refresh, now you're going to actually see DLLs. Well, maybe not. Maybe I did it wrong. I'll have to fuck around with it some more. But anyway, some weird things between release and debug that we're still trying to figure out how they did it. But there's some magic going on here for sure. All right. Any other questions, thoughts, interests? we'll flip back over to slides. So here's the component lifecycle model that kind of covers the basics. So again, some of you guys have mentioned Angular and React. These are very similar. There's nothing new here, guys. They just kind of Microsofted it and .NETted it. Pretty clean.
How's it supported in Visual Studio Code?
Hey, that's a great question. Jesse, you want to field that
Yeah,
one?
it's pretty much fully supported. I got like debugging and everything. I actually when I started working on this, I was doing it in Visual Studio Code. There's some documentation to help you get debugging set up, and I got frustrated with it after about 5 minutes. I have a pretty short attention span, and I was like, I'm just going to switch back over to Visual Studio so I can debug this thing. But I mean, it's fully supported. If you got the patience for it, that was kind of one of my gripes with it. It wasn't as easy as just popping open Visual Studio and get going with it. But I mean, it is possible to do it, and to be honest, it's probably not that hard. You just got to have a little bit of patience, probably.
Yeah, after 3.2, it only takes like 5 minutes to set it up in VS Code. It's pretty easy now. It was a pain at first, but now it's super easy.
Yeah, and there's a lot of documentation around it. So if you're stuck on anything with it, I mean, I'm sure they've got something to help you out. So, like I said, I think it's pretty much there. I just got impatient.
Pressure was on. He had to get his demo done by 6 o'clock tonight. All right,
Yeah,
so
my
third
super
party,
high-tech demo.
this is web-based, so obviously Material, Bootstrap, SAS, other pure web tools work just fine. And there's actually a Blazor material library that's already got all the libraries you need rolled into it. The out of the box one gives you Bootstrap. That's what I have in mind. I used OpenIcon. I don't know if that was included, if I added it, but the OpenIcon plugged right into it. And the vendors were on it from day one. They have a full suite of controls and library, all of them already ready to go, which means just like we've been doing for the past 15 years in IT, we can build Excel in a browser again in a new technology stack, because that's what everybody keeps asking us to do, right? Over and over and over again. I've built the same screen on different platforms. But hey, it's in C#, baby. I like it. So things we did like, it is a rich client in the browser, which seems to be kind of the prevailing way to build apps these days. I mean, I don't know any clients asking for MVC or classic HTML-based apps. They're mostly asking for a rich interactive experience in a browser. So this is my favorite right now. I wish we had more clients using it. We're going to see how it goes. It is C#. It's good. I don't think it works with VB. I don't know if the official stance, but I think Microsoft is kind of turning their back on VB, unfortunately, at this point. So it is compiled. They do have automatic rebuilds. We had an issue with that. I don't remember what that was, Jesse. It was.
Yeah, it's. I think if you run it in release, like I think HTML updates and CSS it'll recompile and you can see those right away. Right. But yeah, when you're debugging, every change you make, you're restarting the app every time.
Yeah.
So that's kind of frustrating, especially if you're used to Angular, where it's like you make a change, save, and it just recompiles on the spot for you. So.
Yeah, it's kind of an interesting paradox. So if you compile it and debug it, you've got to compile the entire DLL or set of DLLs again. If you're running in release mode, it will dynamically compile and rerun it for you as you go, which if you think about it, that's pretty much what Angular does if you use Angular. It just, you can't debug in Angular unless you're using the browser tools directly, but it certainly rebuilds just in time as you change pages. So it's kind of weird. If you're in release build, yes, you get automatic rebuilds. If you're in debug, you don't. And I don't know if that's something they're still working on. They just haven't quite solved it, but it was a little quirky. Otherwise, you do get debugging, which I love, being able to set them breakpoints, quick watch, all that good stuff. You saw the third party. There's immense third party support. I guess it was just really easy for them to take the kind of web components they've been building for other platforms and transpose them over to Razor. JavaScript interop, if you really need it for that kind of weird one-off scenario that everybody has, every project's got one of those. You still can create that bridge, and it's a pretty natural bridge straight into the WebAssembly. As Jesse showed you guys, unit and integration testable, I think that's brilliant. I don't know how many times we've fallen back to things like Selenium and WebDriver to actually run the web pages directly. This lets you run the renderer under the covers, so it's going to be faster, a little bit tighter. and ideally a little more stable. And you didn't get to see too much of the code in action. You saw some static examples, but I'm telling you, I can spin up a new component, add the parameters to it, add the properties on it, call the APIs in seconds and minutes. We work on Angular all day long and have for the last 9 months on a big project. This is quite a bit more productive from a developer's perspective, personally. Things we did have weird concerns about: Y2 runtime models, the server-side model. I'd never use that. I mean, unless I absolutely had to, or there was, I don't know. I'm sure there's a scenario out there, but I can't imagine that being anything prevalent or popular. I just don't know why nobody would ask me for that first, for sure. It might have been there as a bridge to get people to try it out before they got the WebAssembly version running. But it remains to be seen whether or not that's used much in the wild, the server-side model.
Hey, Clint, I got a question for you.
Go ahead. Sure.
Have you done authentication and authorization on client side only yet?
What do you mean? Client side only, like, yeah.
Well, you said you can run just on the client side without the server side code. How do you authenticate?
Well,
like
if you
for
need
a web page against Azure.
Yeah, if you need authentication, you're going to need a web API to call to get auth done. Use bearer tokens or some other form. So, yeah, what I think what Jesse said earlier is you can serve the whole thing up in a CDN. So if you compile the website content and throw it somewhere and serve it up. But yeah, to do auth, you'll still need some authentication authority.
They have one official. It's went through a few updates, but it's on 3.7 right now. I could give you a link if you need anything. So.
Sure.
Yeah, I kind of want to piggyback on Todd's question. So in the client version, can you do any kind of server-side rendering for the initial render? And I'm asking because, normally when you have a framework like React, we use Gatsby or we use, some people use Next.js to do the first, to increase the speed of the first loading. So I just wonder if you guys have if there is a way to do the first loading, don't have to do it from the client, but coming from the server.
Not really. I mean, if you use the server-side processing model, the runtime model, of course, but no, I mean, it's going to have to download that DLL and launch it. The main entry point to the app is in that DLL. So what you saw in our projects is, that the www root is literally an index page with just enough bootstrap. There's the WebAssembly.js is the bootloader that gets the DLL to launch through WebAssembly in your browser. So you've got to get that down to the client and launch that to kick it all off. But you can certainly, with lazy loading, you could certainly have a very small page with like a splash screen be the first thing that comes up and have a loading screen while it downloads the next major part of your application as another DLL. Which is, I think that's a pretty common technique in rich clients. You start off with essentially just a static screen to get the app to get the user to see something real quick.
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, that's how I'd probably approach it. Let's see, the automatic rebuild, we mentioned that. It's a mixed blessing. You get that in release mode, but not in debug mode, which seems kind of counterintuitive. Security and configuration. So Jesse found out while running his that the client-side config files, they get downloaded with the client. So if you've got any config as part of your app, it's better be stuff that the client can see, right? So just like a Windows app that you install on your machine, if there's any config files that are in that folder with that app, the client, anybody with a Windows Explorer can go look at it. So got to just be real careful with what gets included in the payload going down to the client. And even in WebAssembly, I'm sure that you could still decompile it. If not with current tools, somebody will write a C# WebAssembly decompiler and crack your code open. Obfuscation can help a little bit, but at the end of the day, you guys know anything that goes to the client is basically, you might as well give it away with an open book. But I think that's pretty much how the world we live in now with Angular, React, and the other frameworks. So big concern, market adoption. You guys said a few people are trying it out, but for the most part, everybody's playing wait and see. And I'm telling you, I was the guy talking about Silverlight 5-6 years ago. I get it. You know, Microsoft, the line right after that is first party support. Is Microsoft going to support this? This started as a skunkworks project where one of the folks inside of the ASP.NET team grabbed the mono compiler at runtime and tuned it down and built this little prototype. It was basically one person, and showed it around enough, shopped it around enough internally that it got a project manager and a couple other developers. So the team that working on this is not big. However, they don't need to be big. But the question remains is whether or not Microsoft's going to support this long term. And we're on version 1.0. So having been a Microsoftie, they might, if it takes off in the market. If it doesn't, they'll probably open source it and leave it out there for others. And that comes down to, you know, how much support do you need from the vendor? What does that look like to you, and whether or not you want to bank on it. And finally, so go ahead.
That actually, yeah, it gets to a question I had. I'm not a Microsoft person, other than, you know, Windows and Office. But I thought Angular was the front end of choice for Microsoft. And again, I could be completely off base there. And so I just wondered, okay, how does this, you know, if that's true, how does this impact the Angular relationship?
I mean, I'd be curious to other people's opinions. The official line from Microsoft is Microsoft MVC, which is their web-based UI framework, and Blazor.
Okay.
And Angular's an open source third party. You know, I think it came out of Google. So
Yeah, it did. I knew it wasn't Microsoft, but I thought that for Angular.
So many .NET Core users.
Yeah.
They jumped on it because they didn't have a rich client framework, and they were happy to sell backends for it. And it took off, right? Like they're going to support it as far as a vendor that's tools are compatible and working with it. But they support React pretty well too. So no,
Okay.
I think there's an official party line. The other guys who circulate with Microsoft pretty close, I'd be interested if you've heard otherwise, but they're pretty even keeled about it.
Cool.
John, Scott, you guys heard otherwise? I mean, honestly, if you run it on
what you said
Azure,
is right on.
if you run it on Azure, that's more important to them than what the front end stack is.
Sure.
That's
Yeah.
all in on cloud. That's it. So, and then my last concern is really like the future of WebAssembly. Like it's out there. It's been out there for a couple years now, and there's some frameworks that are running on it, but the ones that are the most popular, as far as I know, are still JavaScript. They're transpiled into JavaScript and delivered that way. So I don't know how much longer WebAssembly will be around, be maintained, if nobody's really taking advantage of it. You know what I mean? I would love to see React and Angular and Vue and Aurelia and the others transpiled down to WebAssembly. If that happens in the marketplace, then Blazor, of course, will stick around. So to me, it's really, is WebAssembly going to last more so as is Microsoft going to support this the way Silverlight was for 3 years and canceled? If WebAssembly doesn't take off and become more prolific and prevalent in the market, anything built onto it's going to kind of fade away too. That's kind of my thinking. So,
Yeah, and you know,
Yeah.
one thing to add to that is that I have done some research on WebAssembly, and it seems like it's very focused on big project or things that require big computations, you know. So when you have, and I think that at least what I see it going is something more niche, you know, like, I don't know, if you're gonna run a video game in a browser, you know, or something of that kind, you know, or big computations in the browser, you know, in the browser itself, you know. That's why I see it placing going. To be honest, I haven't seen that much in frameworks themselves. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I hope WebAssembly takes off. Shouldn't all of our stuff be compiled? I think so. I'm so tired of working around limitations of JavaScript. You know, we had one this week. What is it? Date times don't execute the same way in Safari that they do, you know, on the iOS devices that they do on desktop in Chrome and Firefox. So we had to pull in, is it Moment.js, Jesse, that we had to pull in, and we had to wrap date times with a third-party library to get consistent date times. Like, oh my God, it's 2020. Like, why are we still having this problem, right? WebAssembly would be nice because then we're compiling the Microsoft datetime library into assembly language, and we're no longer holding implementation of a JavaScript. Yeah, it's all fun stuff. So yeah, big lesson and big takeaway, I guess, is it's still a wait and see at this point. I don't know if it doesn't take off, it won't get a ton more support internally at Microsoft. I just say that as someone who's seen the inside a little bit when I work there. But I have high hopes. I love it. I think it'll probably get more adoption inside IT shops first before it's used outside in kind of public facing or commercial applications, because there's less risk. You know, I can go inside of a MasterCard or an RGA and I can build little apps like this all day long, and those tend to get kind of rewritten every 5 to 10 years anyway. So they're fairly disposable kind of internal IT trackers. I see that being way lower risk and possibly where this takes off first before, you know, we build a Facebook or a Flickr kind of public monster site on it. But who knows? We're going to keep playing around with it. We're going to, if the situation fits with our clients, we'll suggest it. So I encourage you guys to check it out. It's super, super easy to get started. You can have something up and running in a matter of minutes, something pretty productive in an hour or two. So links there. We'll get the slides put up later on today or tonight. And once again, the bit.ly link for the gift card. Just want to grab that real quick. And we will do the drawing after the meeting and notify the winner tomorrow morning. And with that, guys, thank you so much. Feel free to reach out to us after the meeting's over anytime. We're happy to chat and powwow on this. We're pretty excited about this technology, as you can tell.
Well, hey, yeah, Clint, Jesse, thank you so much. Yeah, this is great. Yeah, this is my first exposure to Blazor, so, and I didn't really have a lot of Silverlight experience, so yeah, this is fantastic. And thank you guys all for attending. Yeah, you could have been anywhere else, but you chose to be here, so that we appreciate you. We'll have the link to this video out sometime tonight or tomorrow, depends on how long it takes to get ready. And yeah, we'll, you know, either Clint, you can provide the links to your resources, or, you know, send them to me or Mark, and we can provide them to the group, however, whatever's more convenient. Yeah, JSTL in 2 weeks. Again, unofficially it's service now, but we'll have an invite out and meet up sometime here in the next couple of days, hopefully, once we get the details hammered out. And again, thank you guys for coming. And yeah, this is great. I'm going to stop the recording. And then, you know, don't feel like you have to leave, and kind of just hang out for a little bit and shoot the breeze or whatever. But yeah, we're going to officially end the meeting now. So.